Will the US attack Iran? There is intense debate in Washington following the downing of a US drone. Donald Trump accuses Tehran of making a big mistake. Iran says the US violated its sovereignty. So what does this mean for an already tense region? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Peter Dobbie. A tense standoff between the US and Iran following the downing of an American surveillance drone in the Strait of Hormuz. Iranian state TV has been showing what it says is drone wreckage retrieved at sea. The American media says President Trump ordered airstrikes against military targets in Iran, but then later changed his mind. Once again, he lashed out at his predecessor, Barack Obama, saying he made a desperate and terrible deal with Iran. Donald Trump said he'd stopped the strike against Iran. Earlier, congressional leaders were briefed on the incident and called for a robust response, but they also told the president to act with caution.
The high-tension wires are up in the region for a lot of different reasons. Some bilateral in the region, some multilateral, some religious, whatever it is. The high-tension wires are up. And third, we must act in a way that does de-escalate and does not escalate the tensions and the situation there.
The president may not intend to go to war here, but we're worried that he and the administration may bumble into a war.
We've been flying patterns like this for months. We're trying to collect intelligence to make informed decisions. We had told the Iranians before they shot the drone down that if you engage against American personnel or assets, you do so at your own peril. The president does not want a war with Iran or anybody else, but he is the commander-in-chief.
Well, speaking to the press during a meeting with the Canadian Prime Minister, President Trump called the downing of the drone, quotes, a very big mistake.
I have a feeling, I may be wrong and I may be right, but I'm right a lot. I have a feeling that it was a mistake made by somebody that shouldn't have been doing what they did. I think they made a mistake. And I'm not just talking the country made a mistake. I think that somebody under the command of that country made a big mistake.
The US maintains it was flying in international airspace, but Iran disputes where the incident took place. During a televised speech, the head of the Revolutionary Guard reiterated his position.
It's a clear and concise message. The defenders of the borders of the Islamic Iranian nation respond to all foreign aggression, and our reaction is, and will be, categorical and absolute. The borders represent a red line.
Okay, let's get going. Let's bring in our guests today. They are Mohammad Marandi. He's head of American Studies at the University of Tehran. He joins us from the Iranian capital. Mann Leverett is CEO of the political risk consultancy group Stratega and formerly a US State Department official. She joins us from Washington. And keeping us company in London, Sahil Shah. He's a policy fellow at the European Leadership Network, where he leads the Iran Project, which works to protect the Iranian nuclear agreement. Welcome to you all. Mohammad Marandi in Tehran, welcome back to Inside Story. As far as the Trump administration is concerned, is there, as of today, a plan B when it comes to what do we do next?
I think that's probably the most important problem that the team in Washington has created for Trump. There is no exit strategy. This maximum pressure policy that the United States has imposed on Iran is really a dead end. The Iranians are saying that we've, after 10 years of negotiations, agreed to a nuclear deal. We've given significant concessions. We've been flexible. And now the United States has exited the deal. It is forcing other countries not to abide by their commitments, including other countries who were at the negotiating table. And it is demanding that Iran give new concessions. And the Iranians know that this is a slippery slope that will lead to disaster. If Iran appeases the United States, then in future, every time the United States wants something more, they will impose sanctions again. So the Iranians are saying we will not appease the United States. If the United States wants to talk about even other issues than the nuclear program, they have to show that they are reliable partners, that they can commit themselves to previous agreements, and that they will implement them. If those were implemented, then perhaps the Iranians and the Americans would be able to talk about other issues. But the Americans have gone down a very different road, and because of that, not only can the Iranians not renegotiate the nuclear deal, that is impossible, but they cannot negotiate with the Americans on any other issue because the Americans are unreliable. So Trump is now standing in a dead end. He can only escalate, which is dangerous, or he has to retreat, which is something that I find it very difficult for someone like him to do.
Hilary Mann Leverett in Washington, is there any chance now that they can hold talks that are basically built on the idea of mutual interest?
I think potentially talks based on mutual interest. I have tremendous respect for my colleague in Tehran, Professor Marandi, but I think the premise that any talks with the United States based on the United States proving that it's a reliable partner are not going to work. It's not just under the Trump administration that the United States is not reliable. The United States under multiple administrations has found itself, even though the president comes to office constantly demeaning and insulting Iran, they always come to realize and understand that they need to talk to Iran because of the strength of Iran in its region and in geopolitics and geoeconomics. Each administration comes to understand it needs to talk to Iran. And each administration does try to do so, but then in the end is not reliable. Whether it was the Reagan administration in Lebanon over U.S. hostages, whether it was the Clinton administration in Bosnia, whether it was the Bush administration where I served over Afghanistan, or even the Obama administration and now Trump. The United States is not reliable. The United States is looking at its interests as it sees it. And I think there are talks possible based on this idea of mutual interest and perhaps mutual respect. But the idea that the United States is going to be a reliable partner would defy, 40 years of U.S.-Iranian interaction, particularly from the U.S. side. Where I see potential possibility here is that President Trump, unlike his predecessors, does see some value in having a deal with a strong Iran that benefits, as Trump sees it, the United States, U.S. interests, and U.S. companies. This is different than prior administrations. It's still not an ideal situation, I would think, from the Iranian perspective or even for other international partners. But it is the one difference that President Trump puts on the table that his predecessors have not.
Sahil Shah in London, who is the U.S. president listening to?
That's a very good question. I think that we could probably have a pretty mixed answer given the fact that we now know that he called for airstrikes but then recalled the order, given the fact that he felt the proportionality of the consequences, which he has told media would be about 150 deaths, wasn't equitable to the unmanned drone that Iran had shot down. I think the fact that the strikes were actually ordered shows that certain voices were winning at a point in the debate, but then because they were recalled, perhaps Trump's own intuition tempered that, or somebody else influenced him. We're not quite sure, but what we know in Europe is that it's become very difficult for Europeans to see how their voice can matter on the Hill and who their allies really are, due to the fact that it's not just Trump and his administration that aren't necessarily handling the Iran file very well, but also Democrats have been remarkably quiet until this recent escalation. And there are a number of ways in which Democrats could help de-escalate and help Europeans make sure that Iran sees some value in staying within the constraints of the deal and also not acting out in the region in a way that could bait the Trump administration's more hawkish voices into conflict.
Mohammad in Tehran, as far as the administration where you are is concerned, what are their suspicions as to second-guessing what Donald Trump's end game is here? I mean, you can't threaten conflict. It's counterintuitive. You can't threaten conflict and push people back to the negotiating table.
Well, the Iranians believe that it's the United States that's left the negotiating table. The United States was a part of the P5+1, and these negotiations had taken place for over a decade. So even Rex Tillerson, the U.S. Secretary of State, the first U.S. Secretary of State under Trump, he was at the negotiating table until Trump left. So that's one issue. The second issue is that the very fact that there's so much chaos in the White House, and we really don't know what happened. We don't know if they seriously were about to carry out a strike. We don't know at all often what goes on in the White House, and because everyone speaks of confusion there, and that's another reason why the Iranians simply cannot negotiate with the United States. They're both unreliable, and it's unclear what they're after. The president is constantly speaking in inconsistent ways, and his Secretary of State and other senior officials like Bolton, their language and their statements are inconsistent with what the president says. So the Iranians basically cannot count on anything that comes out of Washington. What's important for Iran is that the United States is waging war on Iran. This is an economic war. Trump has admitted that. And he says it's these are brutal sanctions. So he's brutalizing the Iranian population. He's attacking Iranian women and children on a daily basis, basically. And the Iranians are saying that the United States has escalated the situation through not only violating the nuclear deal, but trying to harm ordinary Iranians as much as possible, in constantly threatening Iran. We have to remember that Trump just recently spoke about destroying Iran, constantly speaking about all options are on the table, surrounding himself with people who are constantly speaking about war. So the Iranians, they are the only side that right now are abiding by the nuclear deal. For the last year, the Americans left. The Europeans have not been abiding by any part of the nuclear deal. They're in complete violation because they're fearful of Trump. And so the Iranians are saying, why should we continue to abide by a nuclear deal, whereas the other side is doing absolutely nothing? So the Iranians are in a difficult situation. They believe that they're the ones who are trying to de-escalate the situation. That's why they've remained in the deal. But on the other hand, we see that the Europeans are constantly telling the Iranians not to raise tensions, whereas it's the other side that is raising tensions, and the Europeans are cooperating with the Americans to a very large degree.
OK, Mohammad, let me just pause you there for a second, because if what we're talking about here is mixed messages from the Trump White House, maybe some of those mixed messages come from John Bolton, President Trump's security advisor. He has long argued for using force against Iran. Now, he's been dismissive of international diplomacy, and he's advocated the use of military action. He did criticize the 2015 nuclear deal, saying, quotes, only bombing by the US and Israel would take out Iran's uranium enrichment installations, quotes. Now, he supports the MEK. That's an Iranian opposition group in exile, formerly listed by the US as a terror organization. John Bolton has repeatedly told the group regime change is needed in Tehran. Mr. Bolton has adopted a tough approach to Iran throughout his professional life. For decades, he's promised consecutive Iranian administrations the US would, quotes, come after them. Hillary in Washington, has anything we've seen up to now breached the threshold of response? Because there seems to be a trickle down, which is this was an unmanned drone. Mr. Trump today talking about that on Twitter. Had it been a manned aircraft, maybe we would be having a completely different conversation now.
Well, I think what's potentially interesting and important to see through what is a very dangerous, very serious and very dangerous situation is that while on one hand there is chaos in some sense in the White House and in the team here, there is an intentionality to it that I think is really important to see and to understand. President Trump, since the 2016 campaign, has focused on basically two things vis-a-vis Iran. Iran's strength. He understands Iran's strength, and either he wants to deal with it, where Iran is basically working with the United States as Trump sees it in U.S. interests, or he is looking to fundamentally weaken Iran. Those are they are in some ways, two diametrically opposed goals. But for Trump, the idea that you can be in a negotiation with Iran is real. He's in a negotiation, in a sense, with North Korea, something that John Bolton had also opposed previously. And in a sense, by Iran shooting down this unmanned U.S. drone, which is a large and expensive asset for the United States, it gives Iran some leverage in dealing with the Trump administration. And my assessment is that Trump is trying to put that out there to Iran, that Iran, you've downed this really important, expensive asset of the United States, and Trump has pulled back. This is an opportunity for Iran with having the United States pulled back, having the United States, in a sense, step down for Iran to negotiate or at least talk with the United States. Not because Iran's going to necessarily get that much from the United States, but it can constrain the United States so Iran can build its relationship with others and to continue to build its own posture in the region.
Sahil in London, is part of the dynamic here, as far as Mr. Trump kind of backing himself into a corner or being backed into a corner, if you will, the way that it would appear, certainly according to Mohammad in Tehran, that he has zero traction now with the Europeans because they privately and publicly are still on board when it comes to the JCPOA, but they can't do anything more than that because Tehran and Washington are at loggerheads?
Well, I think that I'd like to agree with our colleague from Washington, which is that Iran may now be in a better place optics-wise to enter some kind of a negotiation. But I think that what we have to keep in mind is that their current limit is the text and the letter of the JCPOA. Those constraints are ones that they feel that they've unilaterally now had to abide by. And the things that are part of the framework that Trump wished were part of the JCPOA, namely ballistic missiles as well as regional behavior, those are things that Europeans have also frantically tried to have an add-on agreement to the JCPOA for in the past, before Trump withdrew from the deal. And I should correct myself, Trump did not withdraw from the deal, he violated the deal. And what we're seeing is a huge discrepancy where the US is seen as an actor that can withdraw from international agreements, and Iran is seen as violating it. And this goes to show how the international community is really needed here to step in and urge for restraint, but also highlight the fact that all of these escalations are occurring because of the U.S.'s withdrawal or violation from the JCPOA, and also could be a result of those around Trump who are trying to bait him into a conflict. And for Europeans, this is extremely risky. It is an absolute gamble to think that this is what is needed to get both countries to feel comfortable being in a negotiation. But in fact, because both countries have now shown their muscle, and the U.S. has shown restraint and an awareness that a war would probably break out and be very catastrophic for the Middle East, that we may have a very narrow window here now for diplomacy. And I think Europeans need to lead that effort because we need to fold this from being a US-Iran conversation into something more multilateral. And I'm not just speaking about the participants in the JCPOA, but if we start to talk about those things that Trump wanted to speak about, like ballistic missiles, we really need to have a regional conversation on what constraints make sense for Iran in the context of what other countries are also willing to concede.
Hillary, 2 points. If that window for opportunity is closing, just interrupt you and stop and hold that thought for a second. If that window for opportunity is closing, picking up on that point from Sahil in London, saying it's got to be a multilateral approach, was the approach historically before Donald Trump more productive because it wasn't primarily a binary choice? It wasn't Washington versus Tehran. There were lots of other people in the mix, but those people are now not in the mix, and they're feeling threatened and perhaps more aggressive than they were even just 4 weeks ago or 6 months ago.
Well, the reality is that the other parties were ineffectual. The Europeans did not keep up their side of the deal with Iran. The Chinese didn't even keep up their side, neither did the Russians. The reality is, and what Trump, I think, lays bare to the world, is that the United States, in a lot of ways, is still the superpower, the aggressive, belligerent superpower. And here, I think it's important to understand, again, two things. For Trump, he has complete disdain for the JCPOA, really not because of Iran. Iran, but because of the Europeans. He does not want to benefit European companies or Chinese companies in doing business with Iran. He's focused on Iran in either one of two ways, and they're diametrically opposed, and they're really important to understand. To either have a great deal that he can show that he achieved in opposition to his predecessor, President Obama, that doesn't have to even deal with any specifics about missiles or anything else. It's just a deal that Trump can tout as his own. The diametrically, excuse me, opposed goal of Trump, which is also important to understand, is that if he can't get a bigger, better deal with Iran that he can tout as his own, then I think he is fundamentally looking to weaken, if not destroy, Iran. And I think he's willing to burn the Persian Gulf along with Iran. That will give him a good opportunity to focus on domestic, here in the United States, domestic oil and gas drilling and fracking, which he sees as really important for his reelection, for the United States to become an energy superpower, to have energy dominance on the international stage. So these are two very different goals. And if he can get a deal with Iran, that would be great for him. But if he can't, this idea that he's going to settle for some middle of the road, diffusing of tension, keeping the price of gasoline down, I don't think that's there. I think his other goal, though the other side of the extreme, is also there to fundamentally weaken, if not destroy, Iran and propel the United States as an energy superpower that will be to the detriment of not just Iran, but traditionally important oil and gas producers like Qatar and Russia.
OK, Mohammad, very, very briefly, please, Mohammad, because we are trotting towards the end of our half-hour discussion. Does this increase the chance of an escalation, if only as a miscalculation? What if it's a manned aircraft? What if there's another USS Vicence, July the 3rd, 1988, when a US naval ship misidentified a civilian aircraft?
Well, the Iranians don't believe that the U.S. misidentified that civilian aircraft, and they gave false information to the international community, and the Western media accepted that information until years later when it came out that they had lied. And that is something that Iranians believe is happening today. The Iranians don't believe the American version of what happened with the drone. The Iranians have recovered pieces of the drone in their territorial waters, and they believe that the United States doesn't want the truth to come out. And the commanders of the Iranian armed forces actually said that there was an American spy plane with 35 Americans on board that entered Iranian airspace, but when the Iranians warned them to leave, they left. So the Iranians do not want to attack American soldiers. They just want to protect their sovereignty. And therefore, I think this shows that it's the Iranians, by staying within the JCPOA, by refraining from attacking manned aircraft, even though they were inside Iranian territorial waters, that Iran is behaving reasonably, but that the United States is not. And the big danger is, you're absolutely correct. If the United States goes down this road, then I think it would be a tragedy for the international community.
Okay.
The oil and gas installations in the Persian Gulf region will be destroyed, the tankers destroyed.
Mohammad, I'm going to stop you there because in the last 40 seconds, I want to put that closing point to Sahil Shah in London, if I may, and I do apologise, as usual, for interrupting you, Mohammad. Sahil Shah in London, is there a third-way solution here? I mean, why not, say, use back-channel communications to talk to the relatively new Iranian envoy to the UN? He is formally a nuclear negotiator. He knows what all the cards on the table are.
Well, President Rouhani himself is a former chief negotiator, so I think that what we really need to do is try to figure out a way in the short term to stabilize what could turn out to be escalation in a number of flashpoints between the US and Iran. But in the medium to long term, Europe, Russia, and China really need to get together and figure out how they can sustain the Iranian economy in some way. Iran has accepted that it's not going to get to any of the pre-secondary sanctions levels. But really, we're on a slippery slope on the nuclear side whilst climbing a escalation ladder on the military side. And the two together could be quite disastrous. So I don't see a third-way solution outside of the framework which was already agreed upon in the JCPOA. Unfortunately, the Iranians rightfully see what Trump is offering in terms of talks as not genuine, because in the same breath, they are also announcing sanctions. For example, very shortly before Japanese leader was in Tehran, they announced new sanctions on the petrochemical industry. So it's not seen as genuine, and therefore there isn't much of a third way out of the current crisis other than just we're trying to, at best, return to as much as we can of the JCPOA. And for Europeans, that may mean not saying things like it's essentially game over for Europeans if Iran starts to blur the lines, but to figure out how to ensure that those blurrings of the lines don't result in things that are unacceptable to the U.S. and will lead to conflict.
Okay, we have to leave our conversation there. Thank you so much to all our guests today on Inside Story. They were Mohammad Marandi, Mann Leverett, and Sahil Shah. And thank you too for your company. You can see the show again anytime on the website, aljazeera.com. And for more discussion, do check out our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also talk to us on Twitter. I'm at Peter Dobbie1, or the program's handle is at AJ Inside Story from me, Peter Dobbie, and the team here in Doha. Thanks for watching. We'll do it all again at the same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.